Okay, we'll come back to part B of module 2, communication and 4. So we're going to continue with module 2. Right. So we're going to discuss barriers. Barriers. We're going to discuss barriers. Right. So we want to define what is a barrier. We're going to give a definition. What is a barrier? Right. A barrier is defined as anything that disturbs communication. A barrier is defined as anything which disturbs communication. Anything that disturbs communication, we call it a what? A barrier. A barrier. Right. So, or a barrier is any obstacle or anything which causes communication to break down. A barrier. You can say it is any obstacle which causes communication to break down. A barrier. A barrier is any obstacle which is cause communication to break down. Right. That's a barrier. Any obstacle. Any obstacle can be any obstacle or anything which disturbs, which causes communication to be ineffective. To be ineffective. That is what you call a barrier. A barrier. So we are going to discuss different types of barriers or barriers. Types of barriers. We'll discuss different types of barriers. Types of barriers. The first one that we're going to discuss is what we call physical barrier. A physical barrier. A physical barrier. Right. A physical barrier is any obstacle or anything that we can be able to control or correct. Any barrier that we can be able to correct. So any noise can be corrected. For example, noise of a ringing phone. Someone might even switch off the cell phone or a phone line or any interference can be able to what? To control. So any noise, right? For example, noise of a hooting car, or it might be any interference, or it might be any physical noise, right? For example, a ringing phone, right? Or maybe a faint line. A faint line can also be called what? It is also an example of what? Of a physical barrier, right? Okay, let's move on to number 2. Another type of a barrier that we're going to discuss, number 2. Number 2, right? We have what we call physiological barrier. Physiological barriers. Physiological barriers are those barriers that are caused by a discomfort or can be caused by a disability or a pain. All right. When a disability disability, discomfort, or a pain, interferes with a message. That's what you call what physiological communication, physiological barrier, or maybe it prevents communication or a message to be received, a message to be received. We call it what? A physiological barrier, right? Examples of physiological barriers. Examples of physiological barriers. It includes, it may be when someone is sitting on a hard chair, sometimes you will not be concentrating because of a discomfort that is happening to her, or maybe it might be poor eyesight, which is a disability. A disability. He could not read what was written right on the board because of poor eyesight. Right. It might be also poor hearing. Poor hearing. Some people have a disability of not able to hear well, right? So it can interfere with communication. For example, you're talking to someone who could not hear, has a poor hearing problem, right? So communication might not be reached because of an interference, right? A discomfort, a pain, or a disability can interfere with the communication process that will prevent communication to be received. We call it what? A physiological barrier. Physiological barrier. Right. Right. Let's go to number 3. Right. The third barrier that we're going to discuss is what we call psychological barriers. Psychological barriers, right? Psychological barriers are those barriers that are caused by any mental state. It might be depression, or anger, or fear, or nervousness. It can be a distrust. If I don't trust anyone, it can also cause communication breakdown, right? Any mental state which interferes with a message. That's what we call what? Psychological. So examples of psychological barriers includes fear, can be nervousness, might be distrust. If you don't trust the sender, communication can be interfered with, and it will prevent communication to be received effectively. It might be anger. When you are talking to someone who is angry, right? Or it can be depression, talking to someone who is depressed, right? It's a mental state, right? Stress, etc. Right? Someone who is anxious, right? Okay, let's move on to number 4. Number 4, right? Which is the fourth one that we are going to discuss is what we call perceptual barrier. Perceptual barriers. right? So barriers is a barrier that is caused by the way people interpret, right, communication, or the way people interpret themselves, or the way they perceive uh, communication. Is a barrier which is caused by the way people perceive and interpret simple communication. Right. So, perceptual barriers caused by differences in caused by differences caused by differences caused by differences in caused by differences in sometimes it may be background between the sender and the receiver. They might have differences in background, or differences in what? Educational levels. Levels. It might be differences in um, gender, right? A female and a male. Sometimes they perceive communication differently. It might be differences in needs. It might be due to differences in personality, in introvert and in the extrovert, for example. There might be differences in religion, a Muslim and a Christian. They might have uh, uh, perceive and interpret communication in different way because of differences in what? In religion. Or maybe it might be differences in what? In age. In age, a youth and an adult, right? They perceive communication differently. They perceive communication differently, right? Okay, let's move on to another, the fifth one, the fifth barrier, the fifth barrier, fifth barrier, which is number five. Number five. Right, we're going to discuss what you call semantic barriers, or barriers, semantic barriers, right? Semantic barriers are barriers that are causing differences, meanings attached to words, right? Sometimes meanings might differ, right? The word might have same meaning, same word, but different meanings, right? When different when different words are attached to when different words attached to when different words attached to when different words are attached to a meaning. When different words attached to a meaning. When different words attached to a meaning, to words. Different meanings attached to a word. We call it what? Um, semantic barriers, or it might be different meanings attached to an expression. Right. Examples of semantic barriers. Examples of semantic barriers includes different interpretations, the way we interpret words might differ, or the way we interpret expressions might differ. It might be differences in jargon. It might be differences in accent, etc. Right. Okay, let's move on to the 61. The 60 barrier that we're going to discuss, number 6, which is what we call intercultural barriers. Intercultural barriers. Right. Intercultural barriers are those barriers that are caused or caused by differences in cultures, right? Are, uh, are caused by differences in culture, right? For example, the Zulus and the Xhosas are working together, right? There might be intercultural barriers, right? So under intercultural barriers, we are going to discuss uh, um, ethnocentricity, 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 right? Ethnocentricity is an assumption, right, that one's culture is more superior than another culture. If a person is an assumption that his culture is more superior than other cultures, it's called what? Ethnocentricity. An assumption that one's culture is more superior than other cultures. That's what you call ethnocentricity. When you feel like your culture is more superior than other cultures, that means you're an ethnocentric person. You are an ethnocentric person, right? We're also going to discuss another one under intercultural barriers. We also have what we call stereotyping. Stereotyping is just a generalizing a certain group of people, right? And we feed them in a specific characteristics, right? When we generalize a certain group of people and have a fixed characteristics of what particular group is like, that's what we call stereotyping. Generalizing a certain group of people generalizing a certain group of people and have a fixed characteristics, fixed characteristics right of what a particular group is like. What a particular group is like. Um, that's what we call what a stereotype, a stereotyping. Stereotyping. So if you generalize a certain group of people and you have a fixed characteristic, it means you are what? You are a stereotypist. You are a stereotypist. You are a stereotypist. Right. All right. For example, all Zulus are aggressive. That's being a stereotypist, right? Or maybe, for example, all women loves man. That is a normally likes man. All women likes man. But mind you, not all fellows are aggressive. And not all women loves man or likes man, right? So if you generalize a certain group of people and put them in a fixed characteristic, it means that you are being what? You are what? A stereotypist, right? Right. So let's also discuss another barrier or a barrier, which is number seven. Number seven. Barrier number seven. Right. Barrier number seven, which is gatekeeping. Gatekeeping. Right. So we want to define what is gatekeeping. Gatekeeping. So gatekeeping is a professional process of deliberately create a barrier, right? As a result of what? Fearing of what? Of consequences. Sometimes we fear that of consequences, so we end up creating what? A barrier. So it is a professional process of creating a barrier as a result of fear of consequences of a specific act or action or of situation. Right. So let's give an example of a stereotyping, right? Example of a of gatekeeping. Example of gatekeeping. Examples, right? Sometimes a manager might screen incoming calls. A manager might ask the secretary to screen out, to screen some incoming calls. Right, sometimes he doesn't want to talk to certain people. Sometimes he might not want to talk to certain people, so he might ask the receptionist or the secretary to screen to screen incoming to screen incoming calls. That's what you call gatekeeping. 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 Right. So these are the barriers. We have 7 barriers. Right. The first one, which is we talked about, which is what you call a physical barrier, right? Which is caused, it is any noise, right? For example, a hooting car, an interference, a ringing phone, a faint line. It might be someone yelling, right? Etc. Right. And then we also have number two, which is physiological barriers. A barrier which is caused by a discomfort. It might be a barrier which is caused by might be a disability or a discomfort or a pain. Right. That might interfere with what? With communication. We also have psychological, which is any mental state which interferes with a message, right, or with communication. For example, fear, nervousness, discomfort, anger, depression, etc. Also have number 4, which is perceptual barrier, which is caused by differences in background, differences in educational levels, differences in gender, differences in what needs, differences in what personality, religion, and age, right? And then number 5, we have what we call semantic barriers. Sometimes different meanings will be attached to a word or a phrase or an expression, right? It might be an accent, right? It might be a jargon, or maybe differences in what? Interpretation. And then number 6, we have what we call intercultural. Cultural differences in what? In culture, caused by differences in cultures, right? Those as Zulus, Tswanas, vendors are working in an organization. There might be intercultural differences, right? For example, ethnocentricity, whereby someone might feel that his culture is more superior than other culture, or stereotyping, whereby they are generalizing a certain group and give or maybe have a fixed what? A fixed characteristics of a certain group. Zulus, they are aggressive, right? And then lastly, we have what we call gatekeeping, which is a professional way of creating a barrier as a result of fear of what? Consequences. They are created. Someone might create a barrier because he's afraid of what? Of consequences, right? What will happen? For example, it might be a foreman avoiding the manager because he did not finish what? With the report, or he did not submit the report, right? So he end up of creating a barrier because he's afraid of maybe a punishment or a warning, or maybe a what a deduction in his salary. So he normally avoids so that he will not meet him, so that there will be no consequences, right? Okay, so that's all about barriers. That's all about barriers, right? So we're going to move on to the communication, organizational communication, right? Organizational communication. We're going to move on to organizational communication. Organizational communication. Right. So when you're talking about organizational communication, you're talking about communication which takes place within an organization, right? Organizational communication. Communication which takes place within an organization, right? That's organizational communication. Communication which takes place within an organization. Communication which takes place within an organization. Within an organization. And that's what we call organizational communication. Any communication which takes place within an organization is called what? Organizational communication. Organizational communication. Right. So I'm going to draw the organizational structure in the form of a pyramid so that, or an organizational structure, a simple organizational structure, a simple organizational structure, so that I'll be able to explain the channels of communication, organizational structures, right? So organizational structure has the highest level is the what? Is the CEO, it will be the CEO or the managing director, followed by group of what? Of managers, followed by group of managers, right? We have the production manager, HR manager, there's also a finance manager, there's also production manager. We also have public relations, PR manager, and lastly, we have what you call marketing or marketing manager, right? So you know the diagram, but you should know what, you should understand what I'm trying to draw. I know that I'm not, the drawing is not perfect, right? So under managers, we have supervisors. Under managers, they are supervisors in different departments. And there are other organizations that do not have supervisors in all the departments. Some they might have officers and managers, right? And then under supervisors, there are also what? Workers. These are the general workers. These are workers in each department. These are workers. I'm going to just mention them, WWW, right? So the CEO is the highest level. The CEO is the highest level position. CEO is the highest level of management, right? And then these ones are the lowest, the workers, lowest level of management. These are the lowest level, right? These are the highest level, and these ones are the lowest level. right? So this is just a general or maybe a simple organizational structure that I just drawn, right? So let's discuss channels of communication. 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 Right. Channels of communication. We're going to discuss channels of communication. Channels of communication. Right. Channels of communication. Right. The first one that we are going to discuss, the first channel that we are going to discuss, right, it's what we call the vertical communication. Number one, vertical communication. Right. So vertical communication is the movement of communication downwards or upwards. So it might be downwards like this. Communication moves from and or maybe upwards, right? This is what we call downwards communication. Communication. And then this is what we call upwards communication. Right. So under vertical communication is when communication moves from upwards and downwards, right? So communication can move downwards, right? Right. Right. Let me just start by upwards, upwards, vertical communication. Upwards vertical communication is whereby information is from communication, it is from lower level to the higher level. It is communication flows, when communication flows from higher level, sorry, from lower level to higher level. Right. For example, supervisor, supervisor, supervisor giving a feedback report to a manager. We call it what? Upwards communication. Right. This supervisor here, supervisor giving information to the manager. We call it what? Vertical communication. Vertical upwards communication. And then B, we have what we call downwards or downward communication. right? One-word communication, it is when information or communication flows from the highest level, communication flows from the highest level to the lowest level. When communication flows from the highest to the lowest level, we call it what? Vertical, downwards communication, downwards communication, downward communication. For example, this is downward, downward communication, whereby it's going down, right? So in an organization, the CEO can communicate with the managers, right? CEO can communicate with the managers. The CEO give information to the managers, or maybe giving instructions to the managers. We call it what? Downwards communication. So downwards, e.g., e.g., the CEO, the CEO giving instructions to the managers. Is going down. The CEO is the highest level. Is communicating with the lower level, which is the what? The managers. The managers. Right, let's move on to number 2. Another channel that we're going to discuss is what we call horizontal communication. Horizontal communication. Horizontal communication is when employees in the same level are communicating. Same level, for example, here, the employees here are communicating. Call it horizontal, right? Supervisors are having a brainstorm meeting, right? So when employees in the same level are communicating. Example, supervisors are having a brainstorming session. Supervisors, they are in the same level. So that's what we call horizontal communication, right? Okay, let's move on to another one, another channel, which is diagonal. Number 3, diagonal communication. Diagonal communication, right? Which is when diagonal communication is when employees are within an organization are communicating regardless of the level or of the level of management or departments, right? So it does not follow lines of authority, right? It is when employees from different levels, from different levels, from different levels, and departments. Communicating. When employees from different levels are communicating, right, or different levels of authority or different departments, they are communicating. So it does not follow lines of authority. This channel, diagonal channel, right? Let's move on to the fourth one, which is what we call small group networks, right? Small group networks. It's also a channel. It's also a channel of communication, right? Small group networks normally are also called quality circles. Are also called what? Quality circles. Right. When small groups, right? E.g. committees, right? Committees, or call them what? Quality circles, right? We have what to call OHS committee. For example, OHS committee, Occupational Health and Safety Committee, right? They can communicate normally to solve a problem. They are there to solve a problem, right? So they communicate in order to solve what? A problem. And then let's go to number 5. Another channel that we're going to discuss is number 5. Number 5, we have what we call informal communication. Informal communication. Informal communication, right? Informal communication is when communication which is not formal within an organization. Informal communication is informal information that is not formal, right? It is communication that is not formal. Communication that is not formal. We call it what? Informal communication, which is, for example, gossips, or it might be a grapevine. We call it what? An informal communication. And lastly, we have what we call external communication, which is communication with the outside, with the outside, communication with the outside world, outside world. An organization can communicate with its shareholders, stakeholders. They can even communicate with the government, can also communicate with the suppliers, right? We call it what? We call it external communication. Thank you so much for your time. Please don't forget to hit on the notification, so on the subscription button, so that you'll be notified on anything about communication. Have a good day. Thank you.